This is one of the oldest and most aggressive counterattacks you can play against the King's Gambit. It's called the Falkbeer Countergambit, and in this game, the legendary Paul Morphy shows how to punish White's aggression with some of his own. White starts with pawn to e4, Black replies with pawn to e5. Then comes the famous King's Gambit, pawn to f4 trying to rip open the center early. But Black fights back immediately with pawn to d5, the Falkbeer Countergambit. White captures the pawn with pawn takes d5, and Black instantly pushes pawn to e4, taking space and pushing the initiative. White develops with knight to c3. Black responds with knight to f6, adding pressure to the center. White plays pawn to d3, trying to reinforce control. Black continues the heat with bishop to b4, pinning the knight and threatening more central breaks. White plays bishop to d2, defending. Black now strikes with pawn to e3, forcing White to lose tempo. White captures with bishop takes pawn, and Black calmly castles kingside, staying solid. White retreats bishop back to d2, and now Black takes on c3 with bishop takes knight, doubling White's pawns. After White recaptures with pawn to pawn, Black plays rook to e8 with check, activating the rook and forcing White to defend. White blocks with bishop to e2, and now Black plays bishop to g4, pinning the bishop and keeping pressure on the king side. White pushes pawn to c4 to keep their center. Black plays pawn to c6, a quiet but strong move setting up tactics. White takes on c6. Black goes knight takes pawn on c6, centralizing and looking very comfortable. White plays king to f1 trying to stay safe. But now comes rook takes knight on e2, giving up material to break in. Typical Morphy move. White captures back with knight takes rook. Black jumps in with knight to d4, a huge threat brewing. White moves their queen to b1 to prevent a bishop fork. But Black plays bishop takes on e2 with check, cutting off defense. White plays king to f2, and here comes knight to g4 with check. White runs to g1. Black jumps the other knight to f3 with check, forcing a response. White captures the knight with pawn, but it's already over. Black plays queen to d4 with check. King slides to g2. Black plays queen to f2 with check again. King steps to h3, and now queen takes f3 with check, and White resigns. Here it's a mate in 3. This is one of the cleanest, no-nonsense ways to shut down the King's Gambit. It doesn't give White any chances of winning from the opening. White captures with pawn takes pawn, and Black immediately pushes pawn to e4, grabbing central space. White responds with pawn to d3, challenging the center. Black develops knight to f6, increasing pressure. Now White takes on e4 with the d-pawn, and Black recaptures smoothly with knight takes pawn. White develops the kingside knight, and Black follows with bishop to c5, developing with tempo and adding pressure. White plays queen to e2 to guard and prepare for development, and Black drops bishop to f5, keeping both bishops active and centralized. White plays knight to c3, eyeing central control. Black responds with queen to e7. White develops the dark-squared bishop to e3, and Black jumps bishop to b4, pinning the knight and piling on the pressure. White gives a check with queen to b5, and Black calmly blocks with knight to d7, staying solid. White castles long to get the king safe and bring the rook into play. Black captures on c3, trading off a piece. White delays, recapturing by playing bishop to c5. Now Black plays queen takes on c5, asking for a queen trade. White accepts and captures the queen. Black recaptures with knight takes queen, keeping the initiative alive. White finally takes the knight on c3. Black gives a check with bishop to a 3, and White moves king to b1. And Black ends the sequence by castling kingside, reaching a well-balanced position where Black has solid development and a comfortable game. This line avoids the craziness of the King's Gambit, while still giving Black real chances to counter-attack. This line sacrifices a full knight early and still gives Black the edge. It's aggressive, underrated, and if White's not careful, the position collapses fast. So what if White doesn't take with pawn right away? White plays knight to f3, staying solid and avoiding early tension. But Black isn't here to play nice. They capture on f4, snatching a pawn and opening lines. White hits back in the center with pawn taken on d5. Black calmly develops knight to f6, nothing forced yet, just smooth setup. Then comes pawn to c4 from White, trying to squeeze the center. Black responds with pawn to c6, preparing to challenge the structure. White captures with pawn takes pawn, and Black brings out knight to c6, fast development, central control. Now pawn to d4 from White, locking horns again. But Black plays bishop to g4, pinning the knight, pressuring the center and hinting at tactics. White pushes d5, attacking. But instead of retreating, Black plays queen to b6. Now the heat is on, pressure on b2 and the kingside, everything's under fire. White captures the knight with pawn, and Black immediately throws in bishop to b4 check. The knight blocks and Black castles kingside, everything is coming together. White develops bishop to e2, but now Black drops rook to e8. lining up on the open file, getting ready to strike. Bishop takes on f4, developing a piece, but black doesn't flinch. We bring the other rook to the game. White plays queen to c1 and queen slides to c6, setting up pressure on the diagonal and eyeing the center. White castles, but black says thank you and captures on c3 with bishop takes. Queen recaptures and black instantly hits with queen to c5 check. The king slides to h1, and now black crashes through with rook to e2, gaining back the piece from earlier and ready to dominate. The knight sacrifice, totally worth it. Black has the initiative, piece activity, and control of the board, and the white king's hanging on by a thread. If you liked this line and want more tricky openings like it, check out the full playlist chess opening guides. It's on the screen and in the playlist tab on my channel. Don't miss your next trap.